For many people, religious conviction begins early in life. Faith is learned in childhood as part of family, culture, and language. For others, it comes later. One becomes Christian as an adult, often through what is described as accepting Yeshua, and for some, it is a combination of both. However it begins, faith often takes shape around a set of core ideals. The ethics of Yeshua, the stories of love of neighbor, forgiveness, mercy, and nonviolence. These are values most people respond positively to. In preaching and teaching, it is usually these aspects that are emphasized. The difficult texts of the Bible are rarely highlighted. They are there, but they remain in the background. Then, for some, something changes. One begins to read more seriously, more attentively, perhaps with a desire to understand more deeply, and that is when one encounters what are often called difficult verses. Stories and statements that do not fit the image one has been given. A servant who is harshly punished for having received only 1 talent. Peter proclaiming death over Ananias and Sapphira. Paul's descriptions of homosexuals and alcoholics expressed in ways that feel judgmental and insensitive, or passages from the Old Testament, such as the book of Joshua, with violence, annihilation, and holy war. At this stage, many become confused. Faith may feel lukewarm, not gone, but no longer whole. Often one continues anyway. One accepts that not everything can be understood. Perhaps the Bible is set aside for a time, while faith itself is preserved. Prayer and community remain, and the questions are allowed to rest. For some, this is not a transition at all, but a lasting condition. For others, it becomes the beginning of a deeper search. One assumes that better explanations must exist. One reads theological literature and biblical commentaries. Perhaps one also looks beyond Christianity to Jewish rabbis, historians, and scholars of religion. Some enroll in academic theology. The hope is often the same, to find answers that can sustain one's own faith and perhaps be shared with others. But for some, the opposite happens. After extensive study, Christianity begins to fall apart. Not in rebellion, but in realization. For some, this happens suddenly over the course of days or weeks. For others, slowly, over many years. Explanations lose their power. The texts can no longer be held together as they once were. What was once experienced as the voice of God now appears as human voices, shaped by time, culture, and conflict. And eventually one must acknowledge it. The faith is no longer there. It was not taken away. It was worn down through study. When this happens, it is rarely a neutral experience. Many feel grief, the loss of something deeply loved. Faith may have provided meaning, language, hope, and belonging. When it disappears, it can feel like an inner collapse or like an emptiness. Some also experience a quiet relief, but almost always mixed with longing. Relationships change as well. Christian friends are still the same people, but conversations feel different. One still wishes them well, often more than ever, and often one does not want them to walk the same path, because one knows the cost. But the question arises, do I still belong here? Many choose silence. Not to deceive, but to avoid disturbance. One does not want to become a problem. Perhaps only 1 or 2 trusted people are told. For everyone else, the loss of faith becomes an inner matter. But silence comes at a cost. Can one remain without hypocrisy? Can one pray, sing, and confess words that no longer express what one believes? For some, this is possible for a time. For others, it becomes impossible, and so one gradually drifts away, quietly, without confrontation. Eventually, a new question emerges. How should one live now? Some choose atheism or humanism, not as rebellion, but as honesty. Humanism shares many ethical values with Christianity, human dignity, responsibility, care for others, but without God as its foundation. For some, this brings freedom. For others, a greater seriousness. All responsibility now rests with us. Others do not let go of everything. They retain parts of the biblical tradition that still make sense. Monotheism, faith in a merciful and just God, hope that creation is not meaningless. The ethics of Yeshua, as expressed in the Gospels, may remain, not necessarily as dogma, but as wisdom. For some, interest also turns toward the Noahide laws in Judaism, a universal ethical framework for humanity, emphasizing justice, the value of life, and responsibility within society. What these paths share is a concern for integrity. Having lost faith in one form, one does not want to replace it with something that cannot be held honestly. What is chosen must be able to withstand questions. It must be livable. Perhaps this is what ultimately characterizes life after the loss of faith, learning to live with open questions, without final answers, with a responsibility that cannot be handed over to theology, and with a hope that is no longer guaranteed, but can still be chosen in actions, in relationships, and in the way one meets the world. Thank you for listening. Remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Peace and blessings to you.